right. Hello, everyone. I'm Carmine Paolino. I'm a technical mentor at this year's Data Science for Social Good UK. Data Science for Social Good aims to train data scientists to tackle problems that really matter. Please join me in welcoming Valentine Goddard. She's a lawyer, mediator, interarts curator, and artist. She's the founder and executive director of AI Impact Alliance, which is an independent nonprofit organization whose mission is to facilitate an ethical and responsible implementation of AI. Valentine sits on several committees related to the ethical and social impact of AI, including several committees in the United Nations. In today's talk, Valentine will explain how improving access to AI can help societies meet the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. She will also discuss the importance of the arts in shaping the evolution of AI. Feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A section. And Valentine, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Carmine. I appreciate, and hello, everyone. Welcome to my living room. I don't usually have 160 people in my living room, so welcome. Nice to, I also tried to imagine who's in the room for the presentation today. I've imagined most of you being familiar with AI, so I did not include any definitions of basic applications of AI, nor have I included examples of applications of AI for social good, which I presumed, I hope I'm not wrong, so then don't hesitate to ask me questions at the end in terms of what kind of applications can be done for AI for social good. I took for granted that you are already introduced at least to those types of uses. So I'm going to start sharing my screen now so we can go through the presentation. You just give me one couple of seconds here. Slideshow, presenter view. Oh no, I lost you. Share screen first. Share screen, share. And now I'm gonna go into presenter view. Okay, here we go. Maybe that was not the right view I want. Slideshow, play from start. There we go. Okay, so as Carmine kindly introduced, yes, I'm the founder of AI Impact Alliance, as well as a conference called AI and Social Mission, and workshops called Art Impact, and I'll tell you a bit more about that in a second. I wanted to start with a portrait of a landscape of current AI ecosystems, and thanks to Element AI and IDRC, we have two visuals here. I haven't found any others that really show where and who is using AI. These are the two best that I found. So one of them is in the Global South, current uses of AI, and the other one is the Canadian AI ecosystem. And if in 2018. So if you look a little bit to the right, you'll see I've scribbled some yellow over the nonprofit and public use of AI. And that is to emphasize that this is not an exact precise number of nonprofits that are using or not using AI, but it's a very strong indicative of and from my experience, the kind of work that I've been doing, there's about between 0 and 1% of nonprofit, community-based civil society organizations, NGOs, who are currently using AI to amplify their missions. So this is kind of both me talking to myself in these two slides. 3 years ago, when I founded AI Impact Alliance, I started calling community-based organizations, locally based organizations, larger NGOs, civil society organizations that are working towards achieving sustainable development goals, basically the nonprofit social sector in general. I would give a call, and the answer I would get very often was, well, listen, I barely have internet here, or I don't even have a website. I don't know how to structure data. So yes, AI sounds fantastic. Thank you for giving me these examples of how to apply it. But I can solve social problems, but what my organization has is a digital gap. And digital gap to be solved needs really systemic changes. We can work on solutions towards systemic changes. We can do AI or data for good projects that will solve one problem, or we can choose systemic changes and solutions that will solve many problems at once. It has more impact. An example of that could be funding policies or incentives or tax benefits or IP strategies. I sometimes like to use the example of the first job I got when I came out of law school was I worked at the Ombudsman's office. And I worked in the section that was dedicated to welfare laws. And citizens would call the Ombudsman's office and say, listen, I was denied a right to this and this benefit, for example, free medical care or glasses or teeth, or very, very specific cases. What happens at the type of job that we were doing is we would look, okay, well, we've gotten X number of complaints coming from this office or this region or this type of legal question. And then we could work on systemic solutions. So systemic change is a little bit like architecture for society. And I like to look at mechanisms that can ensure that AI is used as a tool for social good. Today, I hope that when you leave this workshop, you can understand a little bit maybe what is AI Impact Alliance, what we do, what's innovative about its structure. I want to work on a different definition of AI, different definition of AI ethics, and how AI ethics and AI for good actually tie in together. I will go through quickly 8 strategies that I presented 2 weeks ago at the United Nations to ensure a sustainably just transition towards the digital economy. But for today, I really want to focus on 4 of those. So we'll go through that. And the last part of my presentation is about art shaping AI or art making AI smarter. So let me start with what AI Impact Alliance is. It's an independent nonprofit organization. It facilitates ethical, responsible development of AI, and in what way we'll be going through that through the presentation. The main objective is to accelerate the achievement of SDGs. So sometimes it's not necessarily about how the it's definitely mostly generally not about the technical development of AI, but more about how we can use it to achieve sustainable development goals. I realize I'm also taking for granted that many of you know what sustainable development goals are. So very quickly, if you take a quick Google onto UN's SDGs, there's 17 sustainable development goals, and they will refer to gender equality, access to food, access to education, health, sustainable uses of access to water. So there's 17 sustainable development goals. A lot of the work that we do will focus on social innovation, on policy innovation. So those are what I was referring to as the systemic changes, the systemic strategies towards these solutions. The 2 main events that we produce and workshops that we produce that AI Impact Alliance is known for is the conference that I founded at the same time as I founded AI Impact Alliance is called AI and a Social Mission. What is different about AI and Social Mission as an AI conference on its social impact? It was the first conference on social impact of AI. It is divided into 3 parts. There's a learning sharing part with typical panels, and this year we're reinventing ourselves completely, and that'll come as a surprise very, very soon. But the goal remains the same. So there's a learning sharing part that is interdisciplinary discussions and intersectoral discussions. So on a panel, for example, we will have a civil society organization, expert technologists in AI, and an expert historian on tech regulation, for example. The second part is we showcase startups that use AI, or researchers that use AI for social good, so that we can really start to understand what the benefits can be and in what business model they decided to put forward or launch their use of, and the impact of that on their capability to achieve the mission they set forward initially. The third part of AI and social mission is policy discussion groups or solutions strategy discussion groups. We make sure through different techniques that there's small groups can answer questions such as what are your hopes, what are your fears, and what are the solutions. Last year we dove into the future of work, the future of healthcare, and the discussion groups are multidisciplinary. They're a certain balance that is ensured in those groups. The facilitators take notes, and out of those notes, we look at what strategies were put forward, and we publish policy recommendations. Going back to the beginning, who comes to this conference, there's a lot of outreach work that is done throughout the year to make sure that civil society organizations, nonprofit organizations, community-based organizations, social entrepreneurs come to this conference to make sure that their voices are heard. There's 35% of that sector that is represented in this conference, which is extremely rare in an AI conference. There's also over 50% women attending this AI conference. Art Impact AI, I will be talking about it a little bit more later, but it is based on the similar goals and values. We just went across Canada this year talking with artists about the potential AI presents for their art practice, for their community, as well as the risks or the impacts that maybe we want to discuss together to decide what to do going forward. That report will be coming out next week. I'm on the final lines. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is our advisory board. Our advisory board is presided by Professor Yoshua Bengio. I would say a total of about 25% of our advisors are data scientists and AI scientists. The 3/4 of the rest of our advisory board are social innovator experts, democratic economy experts, legal experts, human rights experts, social change artists. Our advisory board is extremely highly multidisciplinary. And international. We have collaborators in Chile, in Japan, in Nigeria. We have collaborators in the US, across Canada. So that is, in short, what AI Impact Alliance is about. Maybe one last thing, when I say independent, I think there's our governance structure is really meant to maintain a certain independence in the policy recommendations or strategic recommendations that are published or put forward and advocated for throughout the year. I think maybe that's my lawyer hat speaking, but if we want to trust the judicial system, there is impartiality or independence rules that are extremely important, not just for the system itself to be trustworthy, but for the appearance of impartiality and therefore the trust we have in that system. So AI Impact Alliance strives to remain independent from any form of influence, yet still very open to collaborating. We collaborate with the private sector in terms of listening to questions the private sector may have. So I think that was it, and we can move to the definition that I've come to through the years on what ethical AI and responsible AI really means. I think we can achieve ethical AI. I think, first of all, it's an ongoing system, ongoing dialogue. It's achieved with informed, and I'm going to start with informed is extremely important. We'll be coming back to that throughout the presentation. But doing a consultation before doing an educational campaign about AI, how it works, and what are the legal, ethical, social, political, economic implications is, I find, an empty process, because most citizens, a lot of the organizations I work with still express a huge need for more information. Inclusive social dialogue about its implications. We'll see again later that there are entire sectors, entire countries who are left out of this dialogue currently. So ethical AI starts with informed, inclusive social dialogue about its implications, with action against its risks and commitment to making benefits realized, concrete commitment. Responsible AI, from my perspective, really means to be able to socialize the benefits. We see, as we saw earlier with the AI now ecosystem and where it is, and at the UN a couple of weeks ago, there's a huge emerging numbers showing that the benefits of AI are privatized currently, and we need to socialize those benefits, and there's very concrete ways that we can do that, and democratizing its access. So I forgot my logo in that little circle, sorry. We're going to look at 8 systemic strategies. Those strategies were presented at the UN 2 weeks ago, and it was really designed in the context of how can we achieve a socially just transition towards digital economy, what the role of digital technology was in that transformation. And the group I was in was on digital governance. So these were really, they're a summary, a condensed summary of the work that I do and solutions that I see. The first one, number 1, 2, 3, 4, we'll be going to a little bit more detail after. Very quickly, it's how we define AI and the impact that has. How we define AI ethics is extremely important moving forward. Improving the access to AI's development and governance, what impact that can have concretely. Supporting civic engagement, focusing, and then 5, 6, 7, 8, I will not talk about much today, but just very quickly. Emerging, for example, the New Zealand algorithmic charter is making it very explicit that agencies that want to collaborate with the government have to sign the charter and have to co-govern in the sense with partners, with citizens. So if there's a group that wants to understand how the data is governed, there's agencies have to be able to explain. There's a certain amount of data sovereignty that is involved. If we collect data about citizens, we have to allow them to have a certain control on how it's used. So these are really interesting questions that I encourage you to dive into. There's also, I'll try to say it slowly so you have time to write it down, or I can send it in a chat box later. The protocol paper, Indigenous Perspectives and AI. Also, along with the New Zealand Algorithmic Charter, ask for data sovereignty and co-governance on data. I saw that also, it's not published yet, but I saw that go a slide on Twitter that UNICEF will be publishing AI ethics charter for kids. And we also see the concept of data sovereignty around the use of data of kids' data emerging. So that is something that is growing in space. Number 6, the Art Impact Report that will be published in the next couple of days goes in a lot more in depth into the intellectual property strategies and how important they are in the future of AI. In short, the Director General of the World Intellectual Property Organization concluded 3 days of discussion by saying that we need a thriving cultural sector to avoid further privatizations of benefits of AI, but also to avoid an imploded digital economy. So that's also an area that I strongly encourage everyone to look into moving forward. 7, monitor the social impact assessments and value the social impact with social return on investments or other forms of incentives. Social impact assessment, a quick word. I'm guessing that most of you are familiar with NeurIPS. NeurIPS this year, 2020, made it mandatory to submit AI research with social impact assessments, as well as declaration of conflict of interest in terms of the funding. So I think that's extremely important moving forward, and I think it's one way of making sure that AI is used as a tool for social good. Lastly, number 8, create an oversight body similar to an ombudsman's office, perhaps, or algorithmic charter. So I can't see everybody here now, so I don't know what field you're in and you're going into. But I hope maybe the initial example that I gave about the work I was doing at the Ombudsman's office can be helpful to understand the role that that kind of organization could have in society, in the sense that you can make educational campaigns, you can look at systemic recurrence of problems with AI uses and work with experts to find solutions. For example, the algorithmic charter that was adopted in New Zealand is sort of a very clear procurement, sorry, switching from French to English a lot. So procurement rules of how to work with the government. So today we're going to focus on these first 4 strategies. The first one, defining AI to include social science and the arts, adopting a living definition or ongoing definition of AI ethics, improving the access to AI's development governance for civil society organizations, and support civic engagement. So the first one, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the concept of STEAM, that's science, technology, engineering, arts with a big A, and math. Arts with the big A refers to arts and the humanities, arts and social sciences as the general. So there was a huge consensus 2 weeks ago at the UN that we really, really need to start I think my perspective is really how we define AI, because I work in that field, particularly the broader theme at the UN was around science in general and moving forward, and technology in general moving forward. So I think if I'm trying to find some very concrete examples, but if an academic research center, for example, wants to collaborate with artists, there's not always allocated funds in the research funding that they receive to be able to pay civil society organizations or artists to help them envision what they're working on, or help engage citizens to help them with the questions they have. So adopting multidisciplinary definition of AI, or a definition of AI that includes the concept of STEAM, would change funding policies from the core. And if you are a data science and you're working on you're the chief scientific officer and you want to put together an AI ethics team, this definition would remind you to include people who are not necessarily high-level experts in AI or data science, for example, but who will be lawyers or social scientists or artists. It helps, so with funding policies and team composition, it adds that necessarily diversity of perspectives and cultural, social relevance in how we approach these questions, and improves how we can share knowledge across disciplines. Why that might be important, for example, I co-organized, I was chair of civic engagement for NERP's 2018 AI for Social Good workshop. And I was the only social scientist in that group. And it's a very interesting how semantics are different. How you work is different. So if, as a lawyer, and I've worked in community organizations, you do outreach work. That does not necessarily resound the same way from a different sector entirely that just has different funding mechanisms or different hierarchical rules. So I don't hesitate to ask me questions about this at the end if that's not clear, but I'm going to move on to the second one and the third one, which is the big chunk. Adopting a definition of AI ethics that can grow. I strongly encourage everybody to have a look at Global Landscape of AI Ethics Guidelines that was done by Dr. Jabin, Yenka, and Vallena at EPFL. And because it's very clearly quantified and illustrated that the civil society organization, that sector, that there's three sectors, right? I mean, I went over this with someone yesterday, and sometimes that's not necessarily clear to everyone, that there are, generally speaking, three sectors that we refer to: public, private, and civil. So here, the civil sector is not represented in the Global Landscape of AI Ethics Guidelines. They found 84 documents worldwide, and of those, independent academic written guidelines, there was maybe 1.2%, another maybe 1% representing labor organizations. So that means a perspective of what is ethical from a worker's perspective. And the Global South is not represented at all in those documents. Things change very quickly, and it's an emerging field. So really happy to, I think 2-3 weeks ago, maybe already, that the position paper on indigenous protocol and protocols, sorry, I think I forgot the S there, protocols and AI by Jason Edward Lewis and Angie Abdillah was published. And if you compare the values that outcome from the 84 documents that Jabin, Yenka, and Vallena refer to, they're sometimes intersections that meet in terms of values. But if you have a look at that position paper, there's 8 recommendations, and we'll see values that maybe we're not familiar with. So relationality and reciprocity, for me, for example, was something that was new, but it deeply resonated. So I think it's important to look at those. They, of course, refer to, acknowledging the cultural nature of all technology and how it's developed. The concept of responsibility is defined differently. So I think to be able to adopt legitimate AI policies, we need, and ethical guidelines, we need a larger number of people, of diverse people, who understand the issues. And large number, maybe easy to do a quick consultation and say, hey, I consulted 500, 1,000 people. Diversity of people is already a bit more of a challenge because not everybody's interested in AI, and I'll explain why later. For, I think digital gap has a lot to do with why some people are not interested in AI, and who understand the issues. And that's really, really fundamental, because I don't think we can make any kind of informed choice if we don't understand what the issues are beforehand. So this is a big chunk: making AI a tool for SDGs by increasing the access to AI for CSOs. And by access, I mean information, access to information, access to tools, capacity to participate in groups that work on the governance of AI and ethical frameworks around AI. And I also want to emphasize on funding, because this slowly emerging movement of participation washing is what Mona Sloan called it. She's at New York University. I love that expression that she coined, because 2 years ago, I was at the UN in New York talking about the role of public institutions. And I said, it's really, really important to support the participation of nonprofit community-based organizations so that they can really participate in these governance groups. I mean, just starting with the basics, not many CSOs or community-based organizations, maybe some bigger NGOs can afford, but mostly cannot afford to go to New York. Luckily, we're all remote working right now, so that might increase participation, which is fantastic. I mean, we should keep it that way. Because usually you can't afford a flight and a hotel in Geneva or New York, where the UN is based. So that's extremely concrete example. I'm going to go through these 5 points together just very quickly. I think this is a really core systemic change that we can address, because it is extremely hard to fund the access to AI for these organizations outside of philanthropic projects that are one solution based, one time based collaboration. So the first result we would get by funding access to AI for your community-based organizations is increase the diversity and the number of women in the development and the governance of AI. Because there's both not enough women in the development and not enough women in the governance of AI as well. It allows us to address underlying social problems. It allows us to improve trust. It allows us to facilitate improve the quality of the algorithmic results, and improves the civil sector's participation in the governance of AI. So I wanted to give a couple more numbers here to make sure that we can see how that would impact. This is a very rough number. I've took a number of statistics around the number of women in the overall social sector, but for example, in social entrepreneurship, there's a huge majority of women. The statistics vary between 6 to 8 out of 10 workers or entrepreneurs in that sector are women. In Canada, close to 70% women are in the overall categorized social sector. So there's and there's also a higher number in that sector of elderly or new immigrant workers in public and community organizations. There is more diversity in general in this sector. Then if you compare to, for example, last year, MILA, which is Quebec's AI Research Institute, there were 5% women at MILA. And that has a concrete impact, for example, of when I decide to, because they have tea talks, which are open to everyone, which I find absolutely fantastic, and thank them for that. I've been to many of their talks, and I was sitting once, and there's 2 girls, myself and a young AI researcher down at the front, and one of the researchers doing as a presentation, and as an example of computer vision, he puts a woman in a bikini. That's 2019. None of the professors reacted. None of the students reacted. And it's really not up to the only girl in that room to react and say something. So I think, for going down to really basic examples, sometimes it's good to bring concrete ones. It has an impact to have more women in AI. I think maybe if the class had been 50-50, that conversation would have been had before he did his presentation and put a bikini on the front. Or girls would start putting guys in bikinis. Okay, 15% women published in AI. Again, there was a research that was done. It varies between 10 to 26 in Spain. So this is a really rough estimate, but there's not enough. 15% AI staff at Facebook are women, 10% at Google. NeurIPS, in 2018, there were 6 people out of 8,500, I'm horrible with the numbers in English, sorry. 8,000 attendees, just read the number. Attendees at NeurIPS. I also want to give like maybe another example here of the impact it can have to have someone with a different perspective. Part of AI for good groups. So social scientists or just in general different perspectives in these groups. 2018 NeurIPS, we knew that no papers from any African university had been accepted so far at NeurIPS. And we're looking at all these submitted papers. And the reaction from some people in the group was, well, it's a great project. It's AI for good, that's for sure, but it doesn't, the abstract is not written properly, or it doesn't have the same quality standards. So we can't do that. It's going to lower the image of our workshop. So I made a suggestion, and it was quickly adopted by many people in the group, and that's what happened in the end. And I'm extremely happy and proud of that group for doing that. Is we decided to group the acceptances in teams of topics instead. So it allowed for more knowledge sharing. It allowed for those participants to be invited, first of all, to present, to co-present at the conference, and be able to be part of that networking and knowledge sharing at the conference. So things change, and those are changes that I hope, I mean, I'm sure went forward and has a broader impact moving forward. Increasing the diversity, and I would just like say not necessarily diversity in women, but more people who are social experts, avoids techno-solutionism. And maybe that's a new term for some, but it's the instinct to solve a problem with technology. I could, for example, talk about there's a lack of access to teachers in many areas of the world and in Canada. And do we want to look at what the social causes are behind the lack of teachers and make sure that there are more teachers deployed in those areas? Or do we want to automatically develop and deploy a technological solution that, because there are amazing growing uses of AI in education that can improve the access to education when it's needed. But techno-solutionism would be, okay, let's find a technical solutions first. Well, no, I would say work with civil society organizations, find what the root cause of the problem, and then really focus the use of technology where it's needed. Working with civil society organizations, NGOs, community-based organizations improves trust. And there I really recommend some reading. I didn't put the quote here, I think it's lower down, on recent social innovation research. Involving civil society organizations facilitates trust at all levels. And I keep hearing, from digital government initiatives, for example, that they don't have the trust. Very recently in Quebec, there was, around the world, there's a lot of discussion around contact tracing. Contact tracing managed by the government will be requiring trust in our government, and the trust in our government, well, pre-COVID, maybe it's changed a little bit now, depending on which country we're in, might have gone up or down. But the trust in government and the trust in technology are two things that need to be aligned to adopt AI responsibly and ethically and democratically. Therefore, involving civil society organizations has that effect. It accelerates the safe, responsible adoption of AI. As mentioned earlier, you can look up the work of Professor Milian Tambe. He's also an award-winning AI researcher. We had a panel discussion together where I was asking about what contributes to the quality of his algorithmic results and guides the question that he asks before deploying projects. And he said, working with civil society allows us scientists to collect higher quality data, ask the right questions. There's also Phoebe Vianas, who now is running the CAIS Center at USC. You can look up some of the work that they do. It's really, really brilliant. And it started by actually aligning two faculties in the university. It brought together engineering and social work faculties, and they work with civil society organizations. And the output, the type of projects that they do and the results of those uses of AI are extremely inspiring. Working with civil society organizations. So there's AI development and there's AI governance. They're always two separate things. Increasing the civil representation in AI governance is, I think, extremely important to make sure that we're not automating values that are representative of one sector alone. And I don't have the slide here today, but I'm happy to send it to anyone or if interested. But what's interesting in the result of this paper is you look at the outlining values, and sorry, I talk a lot with my hands and you guys are not seeing my hands, so the outcoming values are put in order, and basically that's the order that the public-private partnerships see as most important. And I want to give an example. I did a lecture at McGill University, and there were many business leaders in the class, CTOs in the class, and I did that exercise with them where I put the values that were pulled out and asked them if they wanted to add more, and said, which value do you think should be guiding the ethical frameworks around our deployment of AI as citizens? So put on your citizen hat and choose one. And so many people said, okay, sustainability, justice, and then I said, okay, put on your business leader hat. So your CTO now, which value are you going to choose versus your citizen hat? And all of a sudden, the value of transparency, and actually I would say like a very narrow, a slightly narrower definition of transparency, which is basically being able to explain algorithmic results. It became the #1 value to prioritize for everybody in the class, because they said, and one said it very brilliantly, he said it's just so much easier to implement within a business. So do we want values embedded that are business friendly or society friendly? We're now going to go really down to the basic mechanisms. Citizens need more information about AI. We need more civic engagement, but to have the engagement, we need more information. People need to feel that they're part of that conversation. And then I'll explain after that what I mean by critical design. Let's start with information and feeling part of that conversation. When we designed, for example, our Art Impact AI workshops, I wanted to make sure that the images that we choose, the visuals that we choose, the words, the language that we choose, ensure that it's not just, for example, robots, or it's not just data points, that it's really human focused, that it is social impact focused, so that people who have no knowledge, and I even literally write it down, no knowledge required about AI, no technical expertise required, to make sure that people know that they're welcome. And throughout our workshops, we had AI data scientists pop in who are really interested in art and love art, but we also had people crocheting in the class, or in the workshop, or people doodling in the workshop. We had people who really understood AI as artists, who have been working with digital technologies as artists, but some artists who were traditional oil painters. So I think that was really a success in how we designed those workshops, as well as the AI Social Mission Conference, as I explained earlier. There are ways to very concretely make choices to ensure that more people feel welcome in these conversations. The other thing that I would maybe give as advice is not everybody wants to adopt AI, and sometimes these trust initiatives or consultations can feel that AI is being shoved down their throats, pardon the expression. But maybe we want or don't want to use AI. So without promoting AI at large, maybe start with, and what critical design means is an analytical design. Do we want it? Do we not want it? How do we want it? And those are based on the understanding of ethical, social, political implications. So that was number 4. And this is a roadmap. It's still in work. It could be maybe improved, so don't hesitate to ask me questions if you don't understand it. It started with a scribble because I really wanted in the Art Impact AI report that's coming to explain how information was this starting point of ethical, responsible deployment of AI. And I think I've kind of mentioned that and given a couple of examples, but information is really digital literacy that goes beyond learning how to code. It's enabling citizens to make their own choices. And there is high political responsibility about this information. And I'm going to give a recent example in where I live. One government recommends using our public health data, because we have a public healthcare system, and using that data to attract pharmaceuticals to come and boost our economy, because everybody's struggling with economic recovery strategies right now. The oppositional parties react with, no, we can't do that. But in that process, there was a huge chunk of missing, because we need more information about what the different implications are. So in their no, for example, was we could get hacked. Well, I think that is really trying to capitalize on citizens' fears, because we've had 2 major hacks in our Canadian very recent 6-month history this year of data that already exists. And people think, oh, we're going to get hacked. Well, it's not because the pharmaceutical industry comes over here that we're going to get more hacked. This data is already existing and already there. What can we do with our data? That's really a political choice and a citizens-led choice, should be. So government need to be really responsible in a sense and not create more fear in citizens, because we want citizens to be at the table. So we want citizens to be able to understand, because not investing in education doesn't always pay off. So this is my talk to government and public organizations right now. Invest in more information, independent information about AI's different implications and the implications around data governance and data ownership, so that citizens are more informed and it's not used as political capital instead of really enabling citizen choices. So that was my little parenthesis to government. I hope they're listening. Information is the base. So when I'm calling organizations and they said, yeah, well, why should I go to your workshop? Like, I don't have access to internet. I don't have web. Why should I go? Well, look, it could improve your access to health, or it could decrease your public health system. It could do this, it could do that. Do you want to be part of this conversation? Oh, yes, okay. So then you onboard people into having a conversation with, and we can learn about, hey, separate the hype from what's real and the applications and what might be really happening in the next 2-3 years in terms of development, because it's evolving quickly or not. Information will lead to people saying, oh, wow, I find it really interesting. I really want to use AI. In Atlantic Canada, we had this, most people were like, oh, my priority would be to be able to access AI. I'm an artist, but I'm also an entrepreneur, I'm a community leader, and I want to access. learning through access will also improve literacy, because a lot of research shows, recent research shows, for example, from Harvard Business Review, that hands-on learning with technology is probably one of the best. So access is, really purely technical. We need access to internet, web, understand that data governance, make choices around how we use data, build data collaboratives, and then be able to access different potential uses of AI. But we need to understand those uses before we go to the first step. Information will also lead to impact. As I mentioned earlier, not everybody might not be interested in using AI. Not everybody's technical or interested in the use of a technical tool or AI in particular, but it will impact everyone. And there's this quote that I did not include today, but that I love from Yoshua Bengio that says everybody will be impacted by AI. So everybody needs to be engaged in the choices, and sometimes political choices, that we have to do moving forward. Therefore, information leads to having citizens be able to impact AI. It improves that capacity. It informs policies. It improves trust in how the government decides to move forward and digitizing certain services, automating certain services. That is like the roadmap is then leading her in no particular order. I believe that this leads to AI buy-in for community. It leads to AI for SDGs. These organizations generally are working for their communities, therefore will want to address any social issue that is within their current situation. It contributes to more vibrant, alive democracies and trust. It improves AI for SDGs and beneficial social impact. So let me know if you have any questions about this roadmap. I'm going to move to the next part, which is more about Art plus AI Make Smarter AI is my short title. Art shaping the governance of AI and influencing, helping us go through, develop a positive strategy for economic recovery. Yoshua Bengio recently said the future of AI relies on the understanding of creativity and attention in human decision-making processes. So I, of course, hear from that art is really fundamental and key in helping us understand intelligence and make AI smarter. This was a picture from the inaugural edition of AI and Social Mission. And already at that point, I used elements of social or cultural mediation to explain the concept of transparency. Art really helps us understand and engage with new technologies. The black box here was brought on stage. It was painted by my husband, who is a PhD in physics and is running a team of 25 AI scientists. He painted that in the basement with my two kids, my slave laborers. And we brought this on stage. The idea was that we would pull off a side every time one of the panel discussions brought a bit more understanding about AI, whether it was the legal implications or how art helped citizens understand. So we, and the three women that you see on stage, there is an artist, myself, and Carolina Becerra, who is the CSO at Strategy. I'd like to name a couple of other examples to see how art can really help. Some people call it techno-social mediation or techno-mediation, or the word may vary depending on who you're talking to, but these are examples of the use of art to help understand and envision our futures with AI. Maybe many of you, I hope, have already heard of Joy Buolamwini. She was featured on Forbes recently. She started using art, science fiction, to better understand facial recognition, and realized that facial recognition didn't work on darker skins, such as herself. And she did a lot of research and talks. IBM, I think, started funding, and she's that research, and she will be publishing a book soon on her use of art. And I have no idea what her book is actually going to be about, but her work so far has been extremely inspiring in that sense. Shalini Kantaya is a filmmaker who recently interviewed many prominent researchers in the US around the social impact of AI, such as Virginia Eubanks, Sophia Noble, Kathy O'Neill, Ruha Benjamin. Anyway, Coded Bias is the name of the documentary, and that's another use of AI that brings more transparency. The Pink Pyramid was a lot of fun. That one was about emotion recognition, and it was put outside of subway stations. And it was a huge triangle that people could stand in front of. And there was a TV on each side. So people would line up in front of the TV, and it would recognize your face and say, stand closer, stand further. And then the person would smile and say, okay, well, now I'm gonna guess your age, your sex, and your level of potential criminality. And then it says, no, 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 we're going to evaluate your level of kindness. But it hinted and helped people understand that first of all, technology works and doesn't work, but it brings that attention to citizens that around questions of, well, would I want that in an airport now? So it gets people engaged. Hiran Janine recently sent me on Instagram a quote about how we used games in our art impact workshop. So we commissioned a group of young artists in Toronto, and the team of co-designers worked on helping people have an embodied experience of having an algorithm decide who would be criminal. And they based that on current real statistics in Canada about the representation of Indigenous populations in prison. And it had a powerful effect on our participants. And the end of the art impact workshops, after going through concrete examples of how AI works and different types of applications, we would then play those art impact games, where sometimes it generated a lot of discomfort or even sometimes anger, but the right level where, because it's still a game, where we can go on after that to constructive strategies on what will we do to solve this. It really helped engage. And Hiran wrote me, and I was really touched because she said, I'm very curious to see how your work will connect policy change to what I was doing. She said, I felt so empowered to be part of provoking those checks. So I would say like very directly involved in provoking those changes. So Hiran is an art producer and has a BA in international, oh, I wrote internal development. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. International development, I'll change that. Another very concrete example is myself, as if I put my artist hat on now, is I find interesting how training sets or the data can help us see bias in AI. So for this AI generated art piece, I put words beauty, women, beauty, and imperfection. And I don't know how many of you agree with me, but this really looks like a pear shape, and there really is a sort of it kind of surprised me when I saw that. And there's this excellent paper by Kate Crawford and Trevor Paiklin that talks about how the architecture and contents of data sets can either promote or discriminate. So if you're a data scientist, really interesting to look at the impact of the data set. It can approve or reject, make people visible, invisible. Communities can bring communities to be more visible or not. Next example would be art helps AI hear more voices. And this is a text that I input around the role of art in improving the governance of AI, improving democratic processes around. There are governance of AI. And the words were meant to be empowering and positive, but it came out with this image that for me is like a modern version of the screen. Civil society blue. It looks like a police car with a screen face on it. So again, it goes to talking about how AI can have the impact of shaping our views of reality. So artists can help shape AI. AI can shape our vision, but again, AI art can help us understand and envision the impacts of AI. I think this is kind of just another piece that I did where who's watching who. The artists are watching AI and AI might be watching us. So a little play on who's watching who and the pointer to the iterative process. So going back to AI ethics being an alive definition, art is really an iterative process that not just engages, but also helps us think about the ethical and social implications of AI. Now I'm going to talk a tiny bit about, very shortly, about the Art Impact AI workshops. These are postcards that I asked participants to, at the end of the workshop, to choose only one. The blue, and they were to be sent to our Prime Minister's office. The blue meant, after today, I'm really curious. I want to know more about how it works and its different social, ethical, economic implications. The yellow was I want more access. So in our report, that's going to look more like a shopping list. We need this to be able to access AI. And I want to impact AI was sort of divided in two parts where the art sector will be impacted by AI, and what do artists want to do to respond to that impact, and another part about more how artists themselves can help shape the future of AI. And if you look on the side, these are preliminary results. They're more visual, but overall, all artists want information, and it's really me forcing them to choose just one because all artists want more information, more access, and more impact on AI's future. A couple of words, I forgot to put a timer, so I have no idea how much time I've left. Culture for economic recovery and well-being. I encourage everyone to have a look at Brookings Institute's recent report on COVID-19's impact on the creative economy. But basically what they're saying is the arts, cultural, creative economy really drives regional economies, yet it is the most impacted of all by COVID. And any damage to the creative economy will undercut our well-being and quality of life. Mr. Gurry, who's the Director General of WIPO, World Intellectual Property Organization, talks about how incredibly important IP strategies are to economic implications for the arts sector, and that not funding, supporting a thriving cultural sector would cause imploded digital technologies. Their report is going to come out soon because those discussions were held very, very recently, 3 days of international conversations on, because AI is starting, and the whole discussion, international conversation started because some patents were being requested by AIs. And so the international community wanted to come together and find consensus on, do we need to change IP regulations because of AI, who's now applying for patents. And 2 countries allowed that. It might sound a bit surreal, but it's the reality right now. The other thing I'd like to point to for those of you who are interested in the social impact of AI is look at history. S. Wertzler wrote a book about electronic sounds, I believe it's called, and it's really around the history of emerging new media acoustics. So the history of sound at the beginning of this century and how there were patent pools that created, and really that new technology, as instead of having socialized benefits, really went into a couple of the hands of a few. And we currently, if we're not careful, are repeating history of nonprofit educational organizations not having that IP capacity, and they're therefore not being able to really access it. So just in terms of avoiding repeating history, I think that's an important read to have and questions to look into. So that's the end for now. The AI Social Mission Conference this year is November 19th, 20th. We're still in the middle of reinventing it in terms of technology. We have an application that is being developed by AP Lab that is run by Marta Kirsten Ortel at Concordia University, and by her team of students. And that will really help to have an interactive, iterative discussion around the around AI with artists across Canada and around the world. And I'll keep the rest as a surprise. If you have any questions, please contact me. That's my email address. If you're interested in the intersection about how AI and art can collide to create better futures, please follow Art Impact. And that's it. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Stop share.
Thank you very much, Valentine. That was a very informative talk. We have some questions from the participants. So here's one from Saurabh Mishra. I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name. Is there any way students can be also part of it? It sounds so interesting, and I'm interested to work on it by contributing in projects. And I think he's referring to AI for ethics.
If referring to AI ethics in general, it's hard for me to answer because I don't know what setting you're in, what country you're in. AI Impact Alliance operates globally, so do not hesitate to send me an email or to connect on LinkedIn and say that you're interested, and maybe tell me more about what your interest is specifically, and maybe just tell me about yourself. So what are you studying now? Because for example, sometimes students write me and they're studying the conjunction of economy and politics. Well, that is a fascinating entry into the different geopolitical implications of AI, which is very, very applied AI ethics. If you're in philosophy, you're going to have a different perception of maybe what AI ethics are. So don't hesitate. I put some of the links on the last slide, but I'm happy to, maybe in the chat, I'll leave my email address to make sure that anybody can just feel, or maybe Carmina, can you put my email address? Because I don't know how to type into the Q&A here. Oh, chat.
Right.
Maybe here. Oh, I have it. Yep.
Oh, good. You can do all panelists and attendees. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think he also asked to send the slides.
Oh, yeah, for
sure.
So
I guess you guys can contact Valentine and she can send the slides along.
I think I can sort of do that quickly now too, to make sure I don't miss anybody. Here, share, copy, view, and there we go. And oh, maybe, is it possible to send them after? There were just 2 little mistakes, or everybody just forgive my 2 little mistakes. There we go. Okay, next question.
Next and last question. Louise Ringwet. I'm living in Quebec. One of the most important problems with Fitzgibbon proposition is the lack of transparency around the use of our data by those who have the most access to this data.
Oh, what's the question though? That's just a statement.
There is no, okay. Question mark. I guess it's a comment. Maybe she wants to.
Well, I don't know if it was an additional comment or if it was reacting to what I mentioned earlier, but I was rather upset by our government's reaction. First of all, that needs to be part of a public debate. And as I said, we need more education around those different implications. If I put my lawyer hat on, there are ways that we can manage these kind of situations, and privacy laws are changing. And it's not just about privacy, it's about economic models. So the question is extremely broad. I do invite you to, if you're interested, to connect with me either on LinkedIn or sending me a quick email. I don't have any specific answers about how to solve that, but what I would like to see is more responsible government, especially come from the opposition, which is it's not the one that is the party that is in a position to educate citizens and enable citizens to make choices, not tell them what to think and scare them. So I think I talked about that earlier, and that's my main reaction, but don't hesitate to send me an email about that.
Okay, let's wrap up. Thank you very much, Valentine. Make sure to follow us on Twitter and on LinkedIn, and follow also Valentine on Twitter and on LinkedIn, and make sure to check out our slides as well. Thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.